Before we dive into this spine-chilling story, please subscribe now for daily tales you won't want to miss. My name's Lucas. This happened during the last week of school before summer break, but I can still feel the weight of that night like it just happened. Back then, I was just a kid looking for a little thrill, something to break the monotony of classes, projects, and endless homework. I guess we all were. Ava, Noah, Zoe, and me. We'd heard about the basement ever since middle school. Rumors passed down from older students about the strange things that happened down there. Most of the stories were your typical ghost stories. Doors slamming on their own, shadows moving when nobody else was there. The kind of stuff you'd roll your eyes at, but still couldn't shake completely. But then there was the story about Mr. T, the teacher who vanished. He wasn't some name from decades ago. He'd taught here just a few years before we started. People said he was last seen heading down to the basement to grab something, and never came back. The school said he transferred suddenly, but nobody believed it. The idea of someone disappearing that way stuck with us, festering like an itch you can't scratch. The open house was the perfect cover. A bunch of us stayed late that evening, working on last-minute projects in the gym. The staff was too busy packing up for summer to notice if a few kids wandered off. We told everyone we'd be finishing up a group poster for biology, but really, we were just biding our time. By the time most of the other students left, it was just us and a few teachers. Ava was the bold one, leading the way. She always had that kind of energy, dragging the rest of us into her wild ideas. Noah, her boyfriend, wasn't far behind, trying to act like he wasn't freaked out. Zoe kept quiet, but I could tell by the way she clutched her backpack she wasn't thrilled about the plan. Me? I didn't want to seem like a coward, so I tagged along. We waited until the janitor finished mopping the main hallway and disappeared into his closet. Then we slipped away, heading straight for the old stairwell at the far end of the school. The basement wasn't locked, which felt odd. For years, teachers had warned us not to go down there, calling it a restricted area. But now that we stood in front of the door, it opened with just a push. The air hit us first, stale, cold, and heavy, like the place hadn't been touched in years. Our flashlights carved thin beams through the darkness as we descended the creaky stairs. It was quiet. Too quiet. You know how schools always have that hum of distant machinery, even when they're empty. Not here. Down there, it was like the world had stopped. The first room we stepped into was filled with old desks and chairs stacked haphazardly. Dust coated everything, thick enough to leave trails with our fingers. Ava grinned, clearly enjoying the creepy vibe. "What do you think Mr. T was looking for down here?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly. "Maybe he found it," Noah muttered, trying to laugh, but it came out nervous. Zoe didn't say a word, just kept close to me. And then we saw the rules. They were scrawled on a massive chalkboard leaning against the far wall. The handwriting was uneven, almost frantic, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry, or terrified. Ava read them out loud, her voice cutting through the silence. "Never speak after the clock strikes midnight." We glanced at each other, unsure whether to laugh or take it seriously. "Never leave a room without closing the door behind you." "Creepy much?" Zoe whispered. "Never answer when the basement calls your name." "Who writes this stuff?" Noah joked, but his voice wavered. "Never stop the clock, even for a second." That one gave me a chill, though I couldn't explain why. "Never go deeper into the basement." Ava smirked. "Guess we're breaking that one already." I wanted to tell her to stop, but I didn't. Never break a rule unless you're ready to face the consequences. We stood there for a moment, letting the weight of those words settle over us. Then Ava shrugged, brushing it off. Probably just some prank Mr. T set up before he disappeared. "Come on, let's keep looking." We didn't know then how much we'd regret ignoring those rules. The first weird thing happened about 15 minutes later. We were exploring one of the side rooms, a storage area filled with broken lab equipment. Ava was rummaging through a pile of old test tubes when Zoe froze, gripping my arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "Hear what?" I asked, but she didn't answer, just stared at the doorway. There was a faint sound like someone calling a name. It was muffled, distant, but unmistakable. Probably the janitor, Noah said, but his voice didn't carry much conviction. Why would he be down here? Zoe hissed. Ava laughed nervously. Relax, it's just the building settling. Old places like this make all kinds of noises. But I wasn't so sure. The sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't any of our names, but it sounded like a name, drawn out and distorted. Let's check it out, Ava said, already heading for the door. No. Zoe grabbed her arm, surprising all of us. What's your problem? Ava snapped, yanking free. Rule 3, Zoe said quietly. Her voice trembled. We all turned to look at her. Never answer when the basement calls your name. I swallowed hard, the words from the chalkboard flashing in my mind. It didn't feel like a prank anymore. Ava hesitated, then rolled her eyes. Fine, we won't answer. But I'm not running away because of some stupid rule. Zoe didn't argue, but she stayed close to me as we followed Ava out into the hallway. The sound didn't come again, but the tension didn't leave. Each creak of the floor, each flicker of our flashlight beams felt sharper, louder. The deeper we went, the more it felt like the basement was watching us. We kept walking, though none of us really knew what we were looking for. Ava led the way, shining her flashlight over walls stained with watermarks and ceilings full of cobwebs. She acted fearless, but I noticed the slight tremor in her voice when she spoke. This place is massive, Ava said, trying to sound casual. How much junk does a school need to store? Noah chuckled weakly. It's like a time capsule down here. Look at this. He pointed his flashlight at an old science poster, faded and curling at the edges. Feels like we're in a museum. Zoe didn't say much, and I wasn't feeling too chatty either. Something about the air. It felt heavier the farther we went. The silence wasn't natural. It pressed against us, wrapping tighter with every step. Then we hit the clock room. It wasn't marked or anything special on the outside, just another metal door slightly ajar. Ava pushed it open, and her flashlight caught on a clock hanging in the center of the back wall. The thing was huge, easily the size of a car tire. Its hands moved in steady, mechanical ticks, but it wasn't like any clock I'd ever seen. The numbers weren't numbers at all. They were strange symbols carved deeply into the wood. What the hell is this? Ava whispered, stepping closer. The closer she got, the louder the ticking seemed to grow. It wasn't just sound. It felt like vibrations in my chest, syncing up with my heartbeat. Noah walked up next to her, squinting at the clock. Looks ancient. Do you think it's from the old building? You know, before they remodeled the school. Maybe. Ava reached out like she was going to touch it. Don't, Zoe blurted out. Her voice cracked, startling us all. Ava frowned but dropped her hand. What's your problem, Zoe? It's just a clock. Rule 4, Zoe said, barely above a whisper. Ava raised an eyebrow. What? Never stop the clock, even for a second. Ava snorted. It's not like I'm gonna break it. Zoe shot her a look that could have stopped a train. Let's just leave it alone, okay? Nobody argued. Even Ava backed off, though she tried to play it cool. We moved on, but that ticking sound stayed with me like it had burrowed into my brain. Every time I thought it faded, I'd catch the faintest echo, just enough to make me question if it was real or my imagination. It was getting colder the deeper we went, like the basement had its own weather system. Our breath fogged in front of us, and Noah kept rubbing his hands together for warmth. Why is it so cold down here? He asked, his voice bouncing off the narrow walls. Old pipes, maybe? Ava guessed, but even she didn't sound convinced. Zoe muttered something I couldn't hear, her eyes darting around like she expected something to jump out at us. I wanted to tell her to calm down, but honestly, I was just as on edge. We reached another door, this one rusted and heavy. Ava tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Great, she grumbled, giving it a frustrated shove. Locked. Probably for a reason, Zoe said, clutching her backpack tighter. Or maybe it's where the good stuff is, Ava shot back. She stepped back, scanning the frame with her flashlight. Noah, help me out here. I don't think that's a good idea, Noah said, but he moved forward anyway. Together, they leaned into the door, pushing until it creaked open with a groan that sent a shiver down my spine. Inside, the room was pitch black. Even with our flashlights, the darkness seemed to swallow the light. "Why does it feel bigger?" Zoe whispered. She was right. The space felt massive, like it stretched far beyond the walls we could see. And then, just as Ava stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind us. "Shit!" I yelled, spinning around. I grabbed the handle, yanking with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. "Who closed it?" Noah asked, his voice shaking. "Nobody," I snapped. A sound cut me off, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Zoe clutched my arm so tightly it hurt. "We need to leave. Now." "We can't," I said through gritted teeth, still pulling at the door. The whisper came again, clearer this time. It sounded like a name. Noah froze, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "Did it just say my name?" Nobody answered, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. Rule 3. Never answer when the basement calls your name. "Don't say anything," Zoe hissed, her voice barely audible. The whisper came again, more insistent, and this time it was Ava's name. She backed up against the wall, her eyes wide. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore." "Who's doing that?" "Ava, shut up," I snapped. "Don't tell me to." The whisper cut her off, louder now, almost angry. "We have to stay quiet," I said, my voice low but firm. "Everyone, just don't speak." For a moment, we all stood frozen, holding our breath. The whispers continued, circling us like invisible predators. Then, slowly, they faded, leaving behind a silence even heavier than before. Ava glared at me, but she didn't say anything. Noah just stared at the floor, pale and shaking. We needed to get out of there, but deep down, I knew the basement wasn't done with us yet. We stood there, staring at the door that wouldn't budge, trying to keep our breaths quiet. Noah's flashlight flickered for a moment before stabilizing. He tapped it nervously against his hand, mumbling something about the batteries. "Maybe we should try breaking the door down," Ava suggested, her voice still tense but louder than it should have been. "No," Zoe said quickly. "We don't know what's on the other side, or if it'll make things worse." "What could be worse than this?" Ava shot back. Her voice echoed through the room, bouncing off walls we couldn't see. That echo sent a chill down my spine, but it wasn't just the sound. It was what followed. Footsteps. They were faint, like they were coming from somewhere far away, but unmistakable. The rhythmic click of boots on concrete echoed faintly, growing louder with each passing second. "Who's there?" Noah whispered, clutching his flashlight tighter. "Don't," Zoe hissed. "Don't talk to it." None of us moved, too scared to even breathe. The footsteps slowed, stopping just outside the door. We couldn't see anything, but I swear I felt the air change, like something was waiting on the other side. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate tap tap tap, like whoever, or whatever, it knew exactly how to get under our skin. "Do we answer it?" Ava asked, her voice shaking now. "No," I said immediately. "We can't. That's not a person." She didn't argue. The knocking continued, patient and steady, and I remembered something else, Rule 2. Never leave a room without closing the door behind you. "We didn't close the door when we came in," I whispered. "What are you talking about?" Noah asked, looking genuinely confused. "The rule," Zoe said, her voice tight with fear. "We broke it. That's why it's happening. So how do we fix it?" Ava snapped. I didn't have an answer, and I don't think Zoe did either. All we could do was wait, huddled together in the center of the room, hoping that whatever was outside wouldn't find a way in. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the silence felt like a reprieve. Then slowly the door began to creak open. "No," Zoe whispered, stepping back. "It can't come in." "It can't." But it did. The door swung wide, revealing nothing. The hallway beyond was pitch black, emptier than it should have been, and yet the sense of something watching us was overwhelming. "Close it," Zoe said, her voice trembling. "We need to close it now." Noah darted forward, grabbing the handle and slamming the door shut with all his strength. The instant it clicked into place, the oppressive feeling vanished, like whatever had been out there gave up. "Is it gone?" Ava asked, barely above a whisper. Yeah, Noah said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. We didn't stay in that room. None of us wanted to. As soon as the air felt normal again, we made our way back into the hallway, keeping close together. The walls seemed closer now, like the basement was shifting around us, squeezing us tighter with every turn. Do you think the rules reset? Noah asked after a while. Reset? I echoed, glancing at him. You know, like, if we mess up, maybe we get another chance. Like a warning or something. Does this look like a warning to you? Ava snapped. Noah didn't reply, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The hallway forked ahead of us, splitting into two paths. Neither looked inviting, but something about the left side felt wrong, like the air was thicker, harder to breathe. This way, Zoe said, pointing to the right. Why not the other one? Ava asked. Zoe didn't answer, just started walking. The rest of us followed without argument. The next room we entered was different from the others. It wasn't cluttered with old furniture or stacks of forgotten textbooks. It was empty, except for a single table in the center. On the table sat a journal, its leather cover cracked and worn with age. Should we? Noah started, but I was already walking toward it. Something about the journal drew me in, like it was meant for us to find. When I opened it, the pages were filled with cramped handwriting, barely legible in some spots. Most of it was nonsense, random words and symbols that didn't make any sense. But there was one thing that stood out, a list. The rules. They were written exactly as Zoe had said, each one underlined for emphasis. But there was something else, a note scribbled at the bottom of the page in shaky handwriting. The basement doesn't follow your rules. It makes its own. What does that mean? Ava asked, reading over my shoulder. Nothing good, I muttered. Before anyone could say more, the sound of footsteps returned, louder this time and coming from the hallway we'd just left. Run, Zoe said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. We bolted, the journal clutched tightly in my hands. The footsteps followed, echoing through the halls, always just a little too close. We didn't stop until we found another door, shoving it open and slamming it shut behind us. This time I made sure it clicked. I leaned against the door, trying to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst right out of my chest. The room we found ourselves in was a tiny, dark storage closet, filled with boxes and old cleaning supplies. The air felt stale, and the smell of mildew made my stomach churn. Is it over? Ava whispered, her voice barely audible in the thick silence. I don't know, I replied, staring at the door. It felt like we were being watched, even though we were alone in the room. I glanced at the others. Noah was still holding the flashlight, his hand trembling. Zoe's eyes were wide, filled with panic. But it wasn't just fear, there was something else in her expression. Something deeper. I don't think we're supposed to be in here, she murmured, almost to herself. Yeah, we get that, Noah muttered, turning away. But where else do we go? Before Zoe could respond, I caught sight of something strange near the back of the closet. A small crack in the wall, just large enough to squeeze through. It was dark, and I couldn't tell if it was leading somewhere or just another dead end. Is anyone else seeing that? I asked, pointing toward it. They all turned, and for a second, we stood there, staring at the crack. I think we should check it out, Zoe said, her voice a little firmer now. It's the only way out, right? We didn't have any better ideas, so one by one we crawled through the gap, squeezing our way into whatever was on the other side. The room we ended up in was different, still part of the basement, but older, like it had been forgotten by time. Dust covered everything, and there was a strange smell of old wood and dampness. As I stepped inside, my foot hit something hard, and I looked down to see an old grandfather clock, standing tall in the corner of the room. It was the only thing in the room that wasn't covered in dust. What the hell is this? Noah muttered, walking over to inspect it. I took a step forward, my curiosity pushing me closer. The clock was strange, old-fashioned with intricate carvings, the kind you'd expect to see in an antique shop. But it was also wrong. Guys, look at the time, Zoe said, pointing to the clock's face. It was almost midnight. That chill ran down my spine again. The last time I had checked, The clock in the hallway hadn't been nearly that close to striking 12. Do we stop it? Ava asked, her voice unsure. I was about to say something when I remembered the rule. Rule 4. Never stop the clock, even for a second. I don't think we're supposed to touch it, I said quickly, my voice shaky. It's the clock. The rule's right there. Let's just get out of here then, Noah suggested, his voice sharp with panic. But before any of us could move, the clock started ticking louder, almost as if it were counting down to something. The sound filled the room, drowning out everything else. And then we heard it. The soft whispering, almost like a breath, coming from the corner of the room. We froze. I told you, Zoe whispered, her voice trembling. It's not just the clock. It's everything down here. It's all part of it. The whisper grew louder, and we all spun around, trying to find the source. But there was nothing there. Just darkness. Answer it, Ava said, her voice low and almost desperate. No, Zoe hissed, her eyes wide. Don't answer it. That's... Before she could finish, I heard my name. It was faint at first, a voice so soft it could have been my imagination, but then it grew louder, calling to me. Ava. I spun around. No, I said firmly. We don't answer it. But the voice wasn't done. It called again. This time it was more insistent. Ava, come closer. I looked at the others, their faces pale and terrified. I can't, Ava began, stepping back. And then, like something snapped, we all turned and bolted for the door. We didn't stop running until we were far from the room, and even then, I could feel the tension hanging in the air, thick enough to suffocate us. I don't know how long we ran, minutes? Hours? Time had started to feel like a blur. The basement stretched on, endless and suffocating, like a maze with no way out. Finally, we slowed to a stop in what looked like another storage room. The walls were lined with old filing cabinets, each one labeled with dates I couldn't read in the low light. There was a single window, high up near the ceiling, but it was too small to crawl through. We have to get out, Zoe said, her voice tight. We can't stay here. Agreed, Noah said. But how? I looked at the others. Ava was shaking, her eyes wide. I could tell she was just as freaked out as the rest of us, but I could see that she wasn't saying anything. We need to keep going, I said, glancing around the room. There had to be something here, something to help us find a way out. I stepped forward and pulled open one of the cabinets, only to find it empty. The others scattered, checking the other drawers, but we didn't find anything useful. Wait, Zoe said, her voice quiet but urgent. Look. She was standing near the back of the room, staring at a small door that led deeper into the basement. I don't think we should go there, Noah said, his voice shaking. But Zoe was already moving toward it, pushing the door open. I had a bad feeling about this. This is deeper into the basement, I said. We're not supposed to go down there. I don't care, Zoe said, her eyes wild. We have to try something. We're not going to get out if we just keep running. I remembered the rule, Rule 5. Never go deeper into the basement. But it was too late. Zoe was already stepping through the door. The rest of us followed, reluctantly. We couldn't afford to be left behind. The air grew colder the further we walked. I felt my breath catch as I glanced at the others, each of us realizing, maybe too late, what we were getting ourselves into. The deeper we went, the more the basement seemed to shift around us. It was like the walls were closing in, and no matter how many turns we made, everything looked the same, damp, dark, and uninviting. The only sound was the echo of our footsteps, making the silence feel heavier, suffocating. We passed a few more rooms, each one filled with more old boxes and dust-covered furniture. The place felt like it had been abandoned for decades, yet there was something about it that made me think otherwise. Should we turn back? Noah asked, his voice tight with anxiety. We all stopped, standing in the middle of a long hallway. The atmosphere was so thick, it felt like the air itself was watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. I could almost hear the clock ticking again in my mind, the same rhythmic beat that had gotten louder and louder as we moved through the basement. I don't think we can go back, Zoe said, her voice barely a whisper. We've already gone too far. Ava turned to her. What do you mean? Zoe swallowed hard. I mean, we're stuck. We can't go back to where we started. We're trapped in here. I felt a cold chill run through me as I took in the words. Zoe was right. The air around us had changed. The basement wasn't the same anymore. It was like it had come alive, shifting and changing with each step we took. The walls felt closer, more oppressive. I think we need to find the clock, I said, my voice shaky. Maybe it has something to do with the time loop. Time loop? Noah echoed, sounding disbelieving. What are you talking about? I stared at the floor, trying to process it all. Remember how the clock was ticking earlier? What if the basement resets every time it strikes midnight? What if that's why we're stuck? The room fell silent as we all thought about it, but something about my theory felt right. My heart was pounding in my chest as I realized what this meant. We had to find the clock, or we'd be trapped here forever. I wasn't sure where to start, but then something caught my eye, a glimmer of light in the distance. I turned to the others. Look, I whispered. A small light was flickering, deep in the shadows. It was like the basement was showing us the way. We didn't need to say anything to each other. We just moved, instinctively following the light. The path twisted and turned, and the farther we went, the more it felt like the basement was pulling us in. It was almost like it was alive. The walls seemed to shift around us, and every time I looked back, the hallway we had just walked down felt like it had disappeared. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we came to another room, a room that seemed more important than the rest. The air felt different here, charged with something heavy and ancient. And in the middle of the room, on a pedestal, sat the clock. But this wasn't the same clock we had seen before. It was much older, darker, and covered in intricate designs, almost like it was part of the basement itself. Its hands were still moving, and the seconds seemed to drag on forever. The faint whispering filled the room again, this time louder. It was almost like the basement was talking to us, calling us to make a choice. I stepped closer to the clock, trying to steady my shaking hands. And then I saw it, a small inscription on the side of the clock. It read, "Never stop the clock." I froze. The rule that we had forgotten about, the one that haunted us since we entered this place. "Don't touch it," Zoe said, her voice full of fear. "We're not supposed to interfere with it." I didn't listen. I couldn't. Something was telling me that we had no choice. We needed to stop the clock, or we would be trapped forever. With a trembling hand, I reached for the clock's face, my fingers brushing against the cold surface. I turned the hand slightly. Just a second. That's when everything changed. The room began to shake. The walls groaned, and the floor trembled beneath our feet. The clock's ticking grew louder and louder, deafening. I felt like the whole building was collapsing around us. "Run!" Ava screamed, but it was already too late. The air felt like it was thick with pressure, suffocating us. The basement, once dark and oppressive, now pulsed with an eerie light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The ticking of the clock was now a constant, relentless sound, and the walls around us seemed to close in, warping with every passing second. "Where do we go?" Noah shouted, his voice filled with panic. I looked around, but all the hallways were the same, leading to nowhere. The rooms we had passed earlier had disappeared, leaving us in a maze with no way out. "Nothing makes sense anymore," Zoe said, her voice trembling as she grabbed onto my arm. "We have to find the way out," I said, trying to steady my breath. "Maybe we can still escape." But as I looked around, something strange started happening. The basement was shifting. It was like we were in a time loop, a twisted cycle that we couldn't break. The rooms we had passed earlier were back, but they were all wrong, distorted, like reflections in a broken mirror. "We've been here before," Ava whispered, her face pale. This is happening again." It hit me then. The loop. The basement had reset, just like it always did when the clock struck midnight. And then it clicked. We'd been so focused on following the rules, thinking that would get us out. But the basement wasn't a place that played by any normal rules. It was built on control, on keeping us in this endless loop. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Nothing was going to change unless we broke the cycle, and the only way to do that was to break the rules. I didn't know exactly what would happen, but I was sure of one thing. If we didn't try, we were going to be stuck here forever. We have to break the rules, I said, my voice low but determined. What do you mean? Noah asked, his eyes wide with confusion. We can't keep following the rules. We need to break them all at once to escape. Zoe shook her head, panic rising in her voice. But the rules, what if the consequences? No time for that, I cut in. We don't have a choice anymore. I turned to the others, one by one, making sure they understood. Follow me. We break them all. Now. We turned back toward the clock, and as it struck midnight once more, I did the unthinkable. I ran toward the sound of my name. I ignored the voice telling me to stay away. I ignored the rules, every single one of them. And then, just as the clock stopped, everything went black. When I woke up, I was standing in the hallway of the school, just as I had been earlier that night. The clock was gone. The basement was gone. We were free. But I could feel it in my bones, the truth. We had broken the rules, and now we were part of the basement, part of the loop. And it would never let us go. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for daily horror stories that get creepier every night.